getting asked whether you believe the magic bullet theory.
No, I don't believe the magic bullet theory. I believe the single bullet theory. The single bullet theory holds that one bullet went through Kennedy's neck, went through Connolly's chest, and then went through his wrist and lodged in his thigh. I believe that. It's been proved, I think, beyond a reasonable doubt. They were lined up completely. The bullet showed exactly the wear and tear it would by going through those, causing those 7 wounds. It completely holds up in every way, shape, form, and manner. So yes, I believe the single bullet theory. And I think that, in fact, Discovery did a very good test of the single bullet theory, and their bullet came out almost exactly like CE-399.
What do you think about the magic bullets or single bullet theory?
Yeah. So, all right, there's a few points here. All right, so the first thing we're talking about to start this whole thing off is, where did the bullet enter President Kennedy's body? That's the first question. Because everything else,
we have pictures of that.
We do indeed. Everything else,
we know exactly where that bullet entered.
Right, and it's far lower and far further to the right than the magic bullet theory.
Not at all.
Would say.
Completely wrong. We have pictures that show exactly where that bullet entered.
I agree. There's a picture of JFK laying on his side with his head pulled back like this, so that it looks like his neck.
Picture of him lying on his stomach. You can see his back. You can see exactly where that bullet hole is.
Yeah, we'll have to look at the exact picture. People can go find it online for themselves. But in addition to the photo, which clearly demonstrates that it's where I'm saying it is, we have the death certificate itself, which says it's at T3, not T1, so down materially lower. And it also, there's the FBI Cybert O'Neill report, which is huge. The FBI Cybert O'Neill report is one of the central documents here. J. Edgar Hoover. So, the good news is we've got these turf battles amongst these different agencies. Hoover wanted to have his own guys there, his own eyes in the autopsy. So he sent 2 agents, Cybert and O'Neill, and they documented what they saw. They just wrote everything down. And in their report, it says that they probed the wound in Kennedy's back, and they could just get their pinky finger in just a little bit. It did not go all the way through. They were not able to get it.
That absolutely means nothing.
They were not able to get probes through. Now the counter argument is
that's why you would dissect the wound, because the muscles move, the body, that happens all the time.
They didn't dissect the wound.
They didn't dissect the wound. They should have, but they didn't.
Exactly.
But the fact that they couldn't put their finger in, that means nothing.
Well, what it does mean is that the only test that was done to determine whether or not it was a through and through wound, which was not a thorough test, I agree with you, concluded that it was not a through and through wound. So game over already.
That's not true. There was a bruise on the lung. There was all sorts of evidence of a through and through wound. Even Cyril Wecht wrote in his analysis of the medical evidence that it was a through and through wound.
Yeah,
did you read the 1972 report?
Yeah, I did. I would encourage everyone. To.
What did Cyril Wecht say about the bullet wound in the neck? It was a through and through wound.
Yeah, I mean, look, Cyril Wecht's not
right about every single forensic pathologist. Do you think he's wrong?
Maybe. I'm not committing to everything Cyril Wecht is saying.
I'm just saying.
Hang on, there's more.
The best forensic pathologist on the conspiracy side is Cyril Wecht. He said it's a through and through wound.
Good, great. Cyril Wecht's dead.
Every single forensic pathologist who has examined the autopsy, X-rays, and photos say it's a through and through wound.
It's true that the HSCA medical panel did conclude that
medical panel
theory was correct.
Rockefeller medical panel.
Disagree with their finding. Let me just add, there's a hole in JFK's shirt and suit coat, and that hole is exactly where the wound is.
No, it's not.
Now the counter argument Fred's about to make is that JFK was hunched over like this.
No, that's not the argument at all. The argument is that you could see in many pictures his suit jacket was punched.
Yeah, but not nearly as much as it would have to be for your theory to make sense. So again, people can look at this for themselves. I would encourage you, look at the Cybert O'Neill report. Look at the photo. Tell me, is the photo at the base of the neck where Gerald Ford said it was? Or is it really down into the right?
Picture. Forget Gerald Ford. Doesn't matter.
We have a picture, and you and I are talking about the same picture, but we're describing it in different ways. And the reason that you would think it's closer to the top is because his head is back like this in the photo.
That's not true.
But here, let me just say this too. All right, so there's that. Let's talk about CE-399, the magic bullet itself. Okay, people say it's pristine, it's perfect. It's not perfect. It's not. It's got a ding on the bottom. Now, when I looked at it,
the whole bullet is flattened.
On the where?
If you look at the side view, you can see how flattened it is. That's because it hit on the side of the rib, and you know you can see that the bullet is not pristine.
The bottom of the bullet
is pristine.
The bottom of the bullet is certainly affected. If that's what you're referencing, I wouldn't call it flat.
If you look at a side view of CE-399, you will see that it's quite flattened.
Okay, so there's actually, if you look at this bullet, there's a little dent in the nose, and I was always like, that's where the damage is. But that wasn't even that was them cutting out the metal so they could do the test of it, hilariously. Now, people say that, look, the bullet that was fired from the 6th floor, the Carcano ammo, matches the bullet, the fragments that were found in the car. But they use something called neuron activation analysis for
neutron activation analysis.
Right, neutron activation analysis, NAA, which has since been discredited and isn't used anymore by the FBI starting in, I believe, 2005. Okay, so all right. Now, the other thing is CE-399. Supposedly, it went through Kennedy's soft tissue, hit Connolly's rib, wrist, and thigh, and it's still in this condition it's in. But the HSCA looked at bullets that were fired at human wrist cadavers, at a goat, and they're just totally mangled and destroyed. I mean, it speaks for itself. Now, the counter argument is
there's a reason for that. The reason is the bullets were mangled fired directly into a wrist bone, not going through soft tissue and slowing down.
Okay, but
there's a reason for that.
I understand that. However, we're not talking about going through a sponge. We're talking about going. So the theory then is the bullet comes in, it goes through Kennedy's body, which slows it down. Okay, but still has enough velocity to continue to go through Connolly's body and hit a wrist, slows it down, but then still has enough velocity to go into Connolly's wrist, smash his wrist, and then come out his wrist, slows it down, but still has enough velocity to go in his leg.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
that's right.
That's not credible.
Have you not seen the Discovery?
Discovery
did a really good test of the single bullet theory. They recreated every part of this, and the bullet is amazing penetrating power. That's been shown many times by the Hogs. You could see the PBS special. There's nothing special about this.
The bullet fragments that were recovered from Governor Connolly. If you look at those bullet fragments, which, hey, magic single bullet theory, it's one bullet, right? Those fragments, by definition of the single bullet theory, must have come from that bullet. So I would challenge everyone to look up, and I'll tweet it here on Solving JFK on Twitter here. Look at the CE-399. Look at the image of the part of the fragments that were recovered from Connolly's body. Tell me how the puzzle fits. How did where on CE-399 did they come from?
Lead was extruded from the center of that bullet, and that's where those fragments come, and they're all lead fragments.
Lead was extruded from the center of the bullet. Why does it still look so perfect? Why does it look so perfect in the center if lead came out of it? Where did it come from?
The bullet got flattened, and therefore it pushed out lead from the bottom of the bullet, and those are the fragments.
But that's not what the fragments are. Random jagged pieces. They don't.
Oh, yeah, of course they break off. I mean, they're all from the lead. They're all lead. They're not copper fragments.
I'm not trying to convince you of anything, Fred. You believe what you believe, but the audience can listen to this and go, "What's reasonable? Is that reasonable?"
Absolutely. And I think if you look at a good GIF picture of Kennedy and Connolly, you'll see that they react at exactly the same time. You see Connolly's shirt. Basically, the lapel of his jacket goes out exactly when Kennedy is shot. They react at the exact same time, and they're aligned, completely aligned.
Back to CE-399. Dr. Shaw, the surgeon who worked on Governor Connolly at Parkland, said that the bullet was still in Connolly's thigh when he gave a press conference, and that press conference was after the time that the bullet was discovered.
There's a lot of statements where people are wrong.
Speaking of the Parkland doctors, let's talk. So, Sean, I just want to throw this out there. Here's the big question with this whole case. It really just comes down to this. Here's the big Rorschach test question.
Here we go. The big question.
It does. And I'll say that before I dove super deep, I was a little bit more open on this question. Okay. But I'm not now. And here's the question. What's more reasonable? Okay. For the first 43 people who look at President Kennedy and witness his body, his head after the assassination, 43 people in their initial statements said there was a large hole in the right rear of his head. Now, some of those, about a dozen or so, later did change their testimony. That is true. But their initial statements, we're talking about doctors, nurses, folks at Bethesda. It wasn't just at Parkland. So the question is, did they all just have a mass hallucination? Are all of those people wrong? Or your other option, which is not a good option. I'll agree that this other option is not a good option. It sounds crazy on its face, okay? The other option is the autopsy, which shows that the rear of his head is fully intact. There's no hole at all. So the autopsy has to be fraudulent and forged, which is a massive claim. And it's like, oh my gosh, would our government forge the autopsy of the president? Oh, holy, what are the implications of that? So if you only knew that information, that's a tough conundrum. It really is. Wow, did 42 people have a mass hallucination or what? But once you understand that, wait a minute, there is evidence of medical fraud. There is evidence of forgery in the form of John Stringer, who is supposed to be the photographer that
I want to talk about Stringer.
He says that those weren't the same photos he took. He used a different type of film. He says that the photos were taken from the base of the brain, and he didn't take photos like that. He says that the brain he saw was all mashed up, and the cerebellum was messed up, which, by the way, is the same thing that the Parkland doctor said, which is not consistent with the Warren report. So you have a photographer that's supporting the idea that, hey, this doesn't make sense. Then you have Sandra Spencer, who's the lady who processed the prints, and she knew it was a big event. She took an example of the paper that she processed the prints with home with her that day. And then when the Assassination Records Review Board called her years later to come talk to them, she brought it in. She goes, look, this is the paper we used. And then they showed her the actual documents. And she turns over, looks at the back. She goes, this is not the same thing. Okay, so you got her. Then you've got David Mantic, who, folks on the other side will make fun of this guy. But let me just tell you this. That I haven't heard a refutation of David Mantic. And so for example, so let me say what David Mantic says. Mantic is a PhD radiologist oncologist. So his job is to study x-rays. This is what he does for a living. He went to the National Archives. He got access to the original autopsy photos, and he used a device called an optical densitometer to look at the x-rays. And the rear of Kennedy's head, where it's bright white, so it shows that it's intact. The whiteness is so bright white that the bone is hundreds of times more dense than the surrounding bone, which means that it cannot be possible. It's a forgery. Okay. So I'm an attorney. David Mantic would qualify under the Daubert standard to be an expert in court on this matter. I'm not aware of any other experts refuting what Mantic said. Go ahead, Fred. Is there a refutation of that?
Okay, how much time do I have to respond to all of that?
Fred, you've got as much time as you like. We've still got 45 minutes or so left.
Because each of those requires, let's start with the Parkland doctors. Kennedy was brought to Parkland Hospital. The doctors who were working they were frantically trying to save this man's life. There were a lot of people in the room, a lot of doctors, nurses, all sorts of people trying to work on Kennedy. They were not examining the wounds. They were trying to save this man's life. They were in there for around 15 maybe 18 minutes at most, a very small amount of time. If you check the ARB testimony of Dr. Peters told the ARB, look, the back of his head, and don't forget, Kennedy was on a stretcher on his back and it was on an angle. So they couldn't see, but he said it was a mess of hair and bone and blood. You could barely make out what it was. He said it's very hard. You should read his testimony. It's very hard to know exactly what happened. And no, all of those Parkland doctors have slightly different testimonies about what they saw. Let me go on to John Stringer. John Stringer is one of my favorite ones. I like to talk about John Stringer. He was the autopsy photographer. And if you actually read his ARRB testimony, the first thing you'll note, and it's 200 pages long, but the first thing you'll note is that all the autopsy photographs, he says, yes, I took those pictures. The one thing what I noted was his memory was very poor. All throughout his testimony to the ARB was, I can't remember, I don't know, I'm not sure, I really can't say. Over and over and over again, he's clearly had some major memory problems. He never said he didn't take the photograph of the brain. And in fact, guess who wrote a book about his life after the ARB? John Stringer. Have you read his book?
I've not read John Stringer's book. No.
I have his book. I have John Stringer's book. He wrote a book. His whole last chapter was on the autopsy in Kennedy, and he definitively states that he took the picture of the brain, and that is the picture that he saw is the brain that was removed the night of the autopsy. It's there in black and white in his book. He says that.
That's news to me. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, well, it's on my
What
blog.
about Sandra Spencer? Did Sandra Spencer write a book?
Okay, Sandra Spencer. Let's go to Sandra Spencer. If you look at Sandra Spencer's testimony and you look at what she described a body that looked like it was in the mortuary. She said everything was neat. There was no blood. There was a picture of that of the brain on the side. She described something that maybe she saw pictures that were taken surreptitiously at the morgue, but she was not describing pictures that were taken at the autopsy for sure. You go look at her testimony. It cannot be Kennedy's body at the autopsy.
What about the paper? Her whole point of her testimony is the paper was different.
Well, yes,
So
because she might have definitely seen pictures that were taken after the autopsy at the morgue. That's quite possible. But the pictures that she describes, look at those descriptions. They cannot be of Kennedy's body at the autopsy. There was blood everywhere. It's just impossible. David Mantik. David Mantik is not a forensic pathologist. As I said, every forensic pathologist who's examined the autopsy x-rays and photos has come back with the same conclusion, that Kennedy was hit from behind, one shot in the head, one shot in the neck. They all agree. You got the Rockefeller panel, you got the Clark panel, you have the HSCA panel. You also have the forensic pathologists that were talked to by the ARB. In fact, if you look at, there was a forensic radiologist who testified before the ARB, and Douglas Horne, who was very much trying to prove a conspiracy, asked him, "What do you think about what the Parkland doctors said?" And he replied, "I don't care. I don't care at all. They are completely irrelevant to analyzing this case because we do not rely upon hospital doctors. That's why we have autopsies." There's been many studies that show that doctors make mistakes in their analysis of wounds compared to the autopsy. That's why we do an autopsy, because we have specialists who come in and tell us exactly what happened. This happened in the assassination, the killing of John Lennon. The attending physician at John Lennon looked at the wounds. He thought it happened one way. The autopsy said, "No, you're wrong. It happened another way." And that happens all the time.
Fred, you've got a question from Lunchbox, and it is, why are David Morales and Jack Valenti on the side of the Secret Service car in McIntyre photo number 2?
Well, they aren't.
Well, Jack Valenti was, because he was in LBJ's detail, was he
Maybe
not?
Jack, but not David Morales. But
David Morales, if somebody says they see David Morales there, that's a disputed issue. I think it could be David Morales, but that's certainly not proven by any means.
Okay. You've got another question here, Fred, and it was, do you think that Oswald shot Tippit?
yes, definitely. This one's a slam dunk. I mean, yes, Oswald shot Tippit. There were lots of witnesses one witness who saw him shoot Tippit, and many witnesses who saw him either running away or getting rid of the shells from his gun. He was caught with the gun that killed Tippit. The shells from that gun were identified to that gun. This is a slam dunk. He killed Tippit.
If we're talking about photos, talk about the McIntyre 2 photo.
Can I respond to Tippit real quick?
Go ahead.
Yep.
Sean? All right. So yeah, Tippit's an interesting one because there's a timeline that's laid out by the Warren Commission. Okay. And so if you look at literally using the Warren Commission's own times, Oswald would have been leaving his rooming house around 103, 104, or something like that. I mean, this is literally Fred, what would you say it is if it's not that?
Well, if you go to Earlene Roberts said that he came in just for a few minutes. All he did was he came in, he got his gun and left. That doesn't take 3, 4, 5 minutes. I think that he arrived around 12:57, right before the 1 o'clock show came on, and he was out the door, just after 1 o'clock.
That's what. Okay, I said 103 or 104. You said just after 1 o'clock. So okay,
yeah, well,
maybe
2 or 3
minutes.
minutes makes a difference.
So anyway, the time that Tippit is shot ranges between 105 to 115. Okay, there's a wide range, but there's a guy who's got a watch on, and he comes by, and it's 110, and Tippit's already on the ground. That's Bowley, TF Bowley, or not Bowley. That's I forgot the guy's name, but there's a billion names in this thing. So not great going off the dome. We just did this thing. We threw this thing together today. But anyway, so if time and so the counterpoint is everyone's watches must have been wrong. Okay, that's right.
Well,
but if time matters at all, there's no possible way Oswald could have shot Tippit. Second of all, the witnesses weren't sure. Okay, it's not like that was overwhelming that they saw Oswald in the lineup. They were like, "Oh, that kind of looks like him." And many of them, I think 7, a lot. I mean, so this is, if you're on the conspiracy side, Tippit is you got to. That's a tough one. Okay, but the answer is, Oswald. I'm sorry, the night of the lineup, they said where he worked. And he's wearing a t-shirt and he's got a black eye, and Oswald's protesting in front of all the people. So it like, as an attorney, that would have been thrown out immediately. It was absolutely an unfair lineup. But the other thing is, Oswald's wearing a brown shirt, a white t-shirt and a brown shirt. Okay, he's arrested with his brown shirt on. 0 witnesses said that he had a brown shirt under his jacket. Yes, he's wearing a jacket. Yes, but what, did he have it zipped up all the way? No one saw that. 0 witnesses. Also, and this is really extremely telling, the prime witness for Tippit, Helen Markham, what she says, okay, is that Tippit was driving behind Oswald, okay, and she didn't know his name was Oswald, but the cop was driving behind the man. The police car stopped, and then the man stopped. And then the man walked back to the cop car, put his arms in the window of the car, and starts talking to the cop. Is that what you do when you kill the president? You walk towards the cop car and approach it? That makes no sense. They were speaking to each other like they knew each other. And then the man walked around and killed Tippit. And then also, you got problems with timing at the Texas Theater because Butch Burroughs says that Oswald arrived at 107. So what I think happened is that there was someone who looked like Oswald, which sounds crazy. I agree. But we have 27 documented instances of it with FBI reports. 27. Not all of those are legit, but not all of those are made up. Okay, you can go one by one on the podcast.
I can, yeah.
But we have those instances. So yeah, I absolutely believe that there was an Oswald imposter who had been used to set up Oswald throughout the case, who was there, who was the one everybody saw, who was not wearing a brown shirt, and then he led them into the Texas Theater. And oh, by the way, he threw his coat in a random parking lot, his jacket, and Captain Westbrook shows up and he finds the coat. It's amazing. Captain Westbrook, who's in charge, he's like the head HR officer. He finds it. Isn't that great? And then Captain Westbrook goes to work for the CIA in Vietnam the next month. But that's a coincidence. It's a coincidence. It might be, but really how many do you believe?
Look, let me just talk about Tippit for a minute. I mean, a few years ago when I was in Dallas, I'm 68 years old now. So this is when I was around 64 years old. We decided at the time how long would it take to go from Oswald's rooming house to where Tippit was killed. I was with a couple of friends. I'm in my 60s. Now, Oswald was an in shape 24-year-old. I'm a out of shape 65 or 64-year-old. It took me little over 12 minutes to get from Oswald's rooming house to the Tippit murder. He left there around 1 o'clock, 1:01, 1:02. Tippit was shot at 1:15. He had plenty of time to do that. There's no problem with the timing at all. And by the way, back then Oswald could have gone there by going through gardens and back roads because there weren't the fences that there are today. So he could have been running as opposed to walking. So he had lots of time to get there. So there's no timing problem with Tippit at all.
Yeah, let me just tell everybody one more thing about this case and the Texas Theater. That is, I'd be really curious to hear your answer to this one, Fred. Carl Mather. So that's where I'm going. All right. So Oswald is seen by two people say they see Oswald arrested out the back of the Texas Theater. Okay. Butch Burroughs, who's a concessionaire there, and Bernard Hare, who owned Bernie's hobby house next door. He says he sees Oswald be taken out the back of the theater. Well, of course, Oswald wasn't taken out the back. He was taken out the front. We know that. There's documented photos of it. Stuart Reed took one of them. He's a whole different conversation. But anyway, so the question is, are Bernie Hare and Butch Burroughs just totally making this up? Interesting in light of the fact there's 27 other sightings, and interesting in